voice of growth, mastering the mind and market. The next 15 years could be AI hell. The genie is out of the bottle. AI is here, AI is growing, AI will continue to grow. There's no argument about that. What we can do is we can focus in on our own mindset on how to deal with that. We can control our own mind, and that's it. You've got to follow the market. And as such, you got to be ready to pivot. Be ready for this revolution. And like the title says, lead towards that new renaissance. Welcome back to the Voice of Growth podcast, where we help entrepreneurs and business leaders how to master their mind and master the market. My name is Manny Turan, and I'm your host. On today's podcast, we're exploring something that's being talked about at the water cooler, on Main Street, on Wall Street, on Capitol Hill. It's something that policymakers, business leaders, and individuals are trying to figure out what to do with. It's an amazing tool, but it has a dark side. And that, of course, is AI. Artificial intelligence is something that is already here. It's not some lofty in the horizon conversation. We're going to be dealing with this for the next eternity. AI is here. And this topic has been talked about on other podcasts and in other circles, but I felt it was important to share with you the prefatory Stoic version of this, because fundamentally we can't control or change what's happening in the world when it comes to AI, but we can control how we see it and what we do in our circles about it. The name of this podcast is Thriving Through AI Hell, Leading Towards the New Renaissance. It's a very impactful title, and it's packed with a lot of information. It's got some shock value, but there's a lot of truth to this. We've spent the last almost 2 months researching this podcast. We've talked to policymakers, we've talked to individuals working on the ground, writing the code that is being used for AI. We've talked to individuals and experts that are more on the AI safety domain. And we've done a meta-analysis of other people out there talking about this. And what we decided to do is we decided to focus in on the voices of two major players in the domain space. The first of which is Mo Gadot, the second of which is Geoffrey Hinton. I'm going to come back to these names in a minute. But there's something to be said about what we're dealing with today. And the biggest thing is, and by the way, I am a total optimist. I think that there is a lot of good that's coming from AI in the advancement of medicine. There's a lot of tools helping with science, fundamental science. I think there's a lot there, but there's also a dark side. And I'm also an Eagle Scout, and my brain is hardwired to be prepared. The Scout motto is to be prepared. And so for my CEO and business leader friends and comrades here, this is an opportunity that is not to be taken lightly. You must give attention to this. Just like we say that success is your duty to yourself, to your family, to your community, to your employees, focusing in on and talking about and dealing with and being prepared for AI is also your duty. Because as you'll learn in this podcast, it may actually upend and decimate your industry. Let's get started. There is an amazing quote by one of my favorite presidents, Dwight Eisenhower. He led this country through a lot of really epic and major issues as we were dealing with the Second World War and afterwards. And he had this quote that I just absolutely love. And it has to do with planning versus making a plan. So he said, in preparing for battle, I have always found that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. And that planning is about the mindset. It's about the activity. It's about the team members. It's about the active intent towards being ready for whatever comes your way. Because if you create a plan or a series of plans, and then what hits you is not within one of those plans, then you're going to be dealing with whatever the fallout is of that. You're not going to approach that problem and solve it. But the fundamental shift, the mindset of planning, that is indispensable, as he says. Let's start with the warnings from Mo Gadot and Jeffrey Hinton. Mo Gadot was the previous chief business officer of Google X. Google X is Google's skunkworks. It's their development area where they're tackling major world problems using the vast resources of Google. He was in charge of that. And he himself is primarily much of an optimist as well. He had a tragedy in his life. He lost his 21-year-old son to a freak accident at a hospital in Dubai, I believe, when his son was 21. So he wrote a book called Solve for Happy, where he talks about building an equation for contentment. And great guy, great book. He wrote another book called Scary Smart, where he talks about the advent and the rise of AI. He's very vocal about this. If you just do a search for Mo Gadot, you'll find tons of resources online. But I wanted to gel and bring together here some of his major tenets about AI and discuss them because I think they're very powerful. The first of which is he says that AI is moving faster than government can keep up. That's clear as day. Government is still dealing with things in the past. Government has their hands full. AI is simply not in their purview, and any sort of policy that comes in will likely be either too heavy-handed or not enough. And it'll probably oscillate until, like we've said before, the trend just decimates what's happening with policy. Because trends will eat culture and policy for breakfast. There's no doubt about that. You can't stop a trend. The second thing I'll say is without ethical stewardship, he believes we're heading towards a 12 to 15 year period of AI hell. And that'll be starting around 2027. So we're talking about around 2-3 years from now, he believes we'll be entering into that space. And that space, that AI hell, stems from massive homelessness, massive joblessness. And I've said this before, if you think that homelessness is bad now, just wait. If you think that joblessness is bad now, just wait. If you think that competition is bad now, just wait. If you think that the inequality gap is wide now, you just wait. There is a complete shift in the way that business will be done right around the corner. A few other things about Mo Gadot. He believes that mainly white-collar roles will be affected. Things like finance, photography, podcasters, CEOs, accountants, lawyers, potentially more on the paralegal side. And that is, to me, something that needs to be considered because I love being a CEO. I love being a podcaster. I love interacting with my compatriots and my partners in business, and thinking that in the future, my job can be outsourced, if you will, to an AI bot that has all the world's knowledge of how to manage and grow a business. You can kind of see where that can be scary for somebody in my role. A few other things to bring to bear here is he believes that AI isn't the problem, but it's the people behind the problem, the toxic content, the political discourse, the massive amount of addictive tech. I mean, we're addicted to these things. It's not even 2 feet away from me. If you think about it, it's just like anything else. It's the people behind there that are going to use this to their advantage to gain and circumvent and short circuit the process. If you think that phishing techniques are bad now, you just wait. If you think that spamming and cybersecurity crimes and so forth are bad now, you just wait. It's the tip of the iceberg. But with that also comes opportunity. We'll talk about that in a bit. So the idea here is that we need to be focused on how to be ready for this, how to prepare for this impending situation, and I will come back to that. The other thing that people always use, and I'll echo this last sentiment of what Mo Gadot said, we've had a bunch of revolutions, and we've talked about this, about the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, and so forth. And they've always created additional jobs. Whereas if you had a bunch of horse people, we'll say we have 10 people that are dealing with horses. The automobile comes in and becomes prevalent and ubiquitous everywhere. And 8 of those people maybe don't deal with horses anymore. Maybe we have a few still. But of those 8, they go find jobs at the factories. They find jobs making tires. Maybe the actual vehicle themselves takes them to a different location where they need more farmhands or more horse people, whatever it might be. So that's always been the case. But in that case, a lot of that is going to involve their contribution as individuals. They're coming in, they're working on something with their body, with their mind. And what AI is doing fundamentally is changing the paradigm. Mo Gadot believes that, in his words, the argument that AI will create new jobs is 100% crap. His words. I echo that sentiment in the fact that it is no longer a matter of multiplying and providing new tools that you can use with your body or your mind. It's multiplying minds. It's multiplying people doing the work of, say, an accountant or a graphic designer. It's an app. It's a computer process working in some dark data center in the middle of the desert, whatever it might be. It's easy to multiply. If you are employing 15 accountants in your $100 million company working on different aspects of the business, and your spend on those 15 accountants is $1 million a year, if you can instead hire 2 accountants and hire 13 agents, AI agents, to do that other work, and instead of spending $1 million, you're now spending $200,000. Think about what that's going to do for your bottom line. Think about the decision that you have to do as the CEO, whether or not you have to let these people go, because number one, people think that CEOs are always driven by the bottom line. Well, much of us are, but it's for a reason, because you need to reinvest, you need to recompete, you need to put yourself on the global landscape, and it's a different mindset. And we'll talk about that some other time. The mindset of a CEO. I've got that on my list of podcasts. Going back to the decision-making process, I, as a CEO, looking at my team, it'd be very difficult of basically growing my company without using some level of AI. And we're going to come back to that. Why it's important to be a prime mover, a first mover in this. And so now let's turn to Geoffrey Hinton. Geoffrey Hinton and his work was celebrated by the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2024 for his work in deep neural networks at essentially creating the process for which AI thinks. A year and a half ago, ChatGPT and these other tools were very stodgy. If you are early adopter, they didn't work very well. Now you can almost have full-blown conversations with this tool. And imagine in the next 2 years, how much more of this will advance, because guess what? They're now using AI to create an AI. And this is one of Geoffrey Hinton's fears, is that we are losing control of that process. We are no longer understanding the process that's being used to generate additional AI tools. AI is building and creating AI. And there'll come a point in time called singularity where AI will go beyond our capacity as human beings to understand and achieve and deliver results in the science domain. Singularity is also touted as the point where AI will achieve some level of consciousness. We'll come back to that, but it's very important. Geoffrey Hinton believes that there is a 20% chance that AI could lead to human extinction in the next 30 years. So by the time it's 2055 or so, human existence could cease completely. And this is obviously a doomsday thing. He wasn't always this way. If you actually spent some time reading his work, looking at his podcasts and videos, you'll see that his mind changed once he realized how fast this is coming out of our control. He believes this is possible. Now, it's not going to be necessarily by some crazy Skynet singular device just squashing the human race. It might come as a result of massive homelessness, of massive inequality, of massive joblessness. People are struggling with this idea of a universal basic income. And you've got these massive wars about resources and water and whatever. And so AI could play a role in this, where a selective few get the benefit and the rest of society is dealing with the fallout, and there's war, and that is potentially what he says, how it could end. 20% chance. A few other things he says, and I mentioned this earlier, he's concerned about AI making its own languages that humans can't understand. He expects in the short term that AI will supercharge misinformation, surveillance, and things even like making bioweapons. And then in the long term, he believes that the risk is immeasurable on how we'll lose contact with our own humanness, and AI will become central to everything. There's one thing I didn't mention about what Mogadat talks about. He believes that after this 12 to 15 year period, we have the ability to create a level of a utopia where there's very little disease, there's very little inequality, there's food for everybody, abundance, and there's song and dance and arts and literature and all of that. I don't know about how I feel about that. I think that he believes also that we should submit to AI in the sense of, if we provide those guardrails for AI, it will take care of the humans in a good way. My fear is that those guardrails aren't being put on now. How are we going to deal with it when AI is more powerful? How are those guardrails going to be put on? I mean, I don't understand, having spoken to developers that are creating these things and watching AI grow new limbs, essentially, in the code base. They're going in a direction, a direction that they never even thought about. And they're fearful and they're excited at the same time, because they're like, wow, look how much more efficient and this is happening. But they realize it's happening at such a fast rate that they can't contain it. It'll be interesting to see what happens. The idea here is that the next 15 years will be a storm. The next 15 years could be AI hell. And the Stoic response, the perfectory response, is why we're here today. The first of which is, we can't control what's happening. The genie is out of the bottle. AI is here, AI is growing, AI will continue to grow, and will change the way we do business, change the way we live. There's no argument about that. But what we can do is we can focus in on our own mindset on how to deal with that. We can control our own mind, and that's it. The further we go from our mind, the less we control. So from our mind to our mouth, we lose about 5%. What I mean to say by that is, we say something, but the other person interprets something else, we lose some control there. As we start to have people are in our family or employees, we obviously don't control them. We can tell them what we want, we can tell them our vision, we tell them what we'd like to accomplish, but they're sentient human beings. They're going to decide what they want, and so we lose control there, and so forth and so on. But as business leaders, we can start with the mindset, and then we can create policies and conversations around what's happening to prepare us for what's happening. So we created a framework, a disruption readiness framework, that I'm going to talk about, that will help you as business leaders prepare for this impending AI hell. And essentially, it comes down to mastering the mind and the market. The very mantra of Perfectory is listed here. The first of which is, establish an AI readiness and risk command center. This has to do with mastering the market. So the first thing you want to do is you want to bring together people in your company, in your trade association, in your industry, whatever it might be, and you want to understand what tools are available now that you're using. What are you using, number one? Number two, from those tools, where are there gaps, where things you want to accomplish, but you don't have the solution for? Go out there and find those to see what's there. Then you're going to start building this out to see what other tools are available in the general market. And then you want to start thinking about what tool, if it existed or if it already exists, can completely decimate your business. If you are a company of 15 accountants, there are tools today that can potentially decimate your business. They're right there. They're on the horizon. So you need to figure that out, and you need to bring them up to the attention of that cohort. You then need to understand, and by the way, you should be doing this on a monthly basis. Things change so fast, it'd behoove you to do it even more often, but I think every month is a good pace for these conversations. You also want to see, if you're smart about it, you want to see if you can develop tools that will help your market, your competitors even, in that domain. One of the things about this whole process that we're going to talk about is a level of being nimble in your market and in your offering, whatever your value is. Something to keep in mind. The last thing I'll say about this number one thing, and by the way, this is going to be available as a download, including a scorecard, which I'll come back to in a bit, on our website for you to use and map out as you create this for yourself and for your company. The last thing I'll say on the Establishing AI Readiness Command Center is, don't wait for an official mantra or official guidance. It's not coming. No one's coming to save you. This has to be on your own hands. Success is your duty. Understanding and dealing with what's happening with AI is also your duty. So you need to have that mindset, because if you don't do it, no one else will. And eventually the market will correct and you'll be out of a job. Number 2, engineer resilience into your leadership and team culture. I've said it before that it's important that your culture is tied to your identity. I've talked about this in certain talks I've given. And identity is really important, not only from a self situation, but as a company. What is the identity of the company? And we'll do an entire podcast on this as well. It's very important. If you understand and listen to the works of Atomic Habits, James Clear, you'll understand what I mean by that. Identity has to do with how you operate as your business, what you deliver, what your voice is, your brand. All that is tied to your identity. And so culture is the behind the scenes version of that. You need to build practice within your company that focuses in on resilience and leadership. It's mattered throughout time, leadership in business, but no time more than now will it matter the most. Your leadership and the leadership of your employees needs to be on point, because in these next 3 years, there's going to be massive issues come up in the market that your company needs to have resilience for, creativity for. You need to have grit, and you need to lean on your values and your ethics. That's another aspect of this. You need to make those values part of your very core. You know, you hear the vision statements, you hear the mission statements, which are important, by the way. Sometimes they're just thrown up on the wall. But if you embody your vision and your mission statement into what you do, and those include elements of AI, which I believe they need to. I'm actually in the middle of rewriting our own for the company that I run. They need to include AI in there, because it will change the way things get done, and it's going to be a massive change in the way we work and we live. Number 3, double down on human-only advantages. So what does that mean? That means empathy, that means creativity, that means judgment, that means in-person events. That means everything you can do in your business and your capabilities to embody the humanness of your organization. Your voice can be replicated today on these channels that exist, on these apps that exist. They can take an image of you, they can hear your voice, and they can produce videos all day long of you hurrahing and this and that. That's not enough. You got to press the flesh. You got to be in person. You got to make the time to amplify your humanness. And it's always hard to think about, because we just operate business so fast. Like, oh my God, I've got to go fly to see this guy. If I can just have a 1-hour Zoom call, that's going to become much more important. Staying focused on that and giving attention to that needs to be part of one of your top priorities. Second thing about this is building extremely deep foundations with your customers and your potential customers. That foundation is something that I've done through the course of my career, just because I've been in sales and I've learned the power of networking, but a true networking, not some sort of superficial thing you do when you shake hands and you exchange business cards and never see each other again. I'm talking of a very deep networking opportunity. I probably make between 40 and 50 random phone calls a week to people that I know or just met to make sure that I understand the value that they can provide me and my organization, and vice versa, that they can understand how I can provide them value. And then I check up on them every quarter. I'm making calls to the East Coast. I'm making calls overseas. And I'm talking calls. I set up a message with text, and then I call them. If I don't hear from them, I call them directly. And I do this because it's important for me to maintain a very strong network. This will have to be done by you and your organization even more so as we enter into this new AI space. I'll call it space. I won't call it hell. Number 4, implement ethical AI guidelines now. That means as an organization, you need to decide what AI tool you will use or will not use and why. And you've got to let your customers know you're doing it. Sounds silly because it's like, oh, everybody's using it. What I got to tell people about whether I'm using, Microsoft Excel. This time's different because now you are creating work product for them or doing work product for them using something that is not necessarily embodied in your company. When you're using something like Excel, that is a tool, that's a hammer, and you're coming in with your work, you're putting it into that, you're doing your analysis, and then you're taking that and giving it to the customer or doing whatever. When you take that same thing and feeding it into an AI mechanism, that other company that created that AI is doing some of that work product. So you need to put in your contracts, in your service agreements, some level of, by the way, we use this kind of AI to do this. And the other thing I'll say about this last guideline statement is, in addition to doing that, you need to review the work product before it goes out. If you're creating some work using AI, say you're a paralegal firm, you're a legal firm and your paralegal is using some tool to create some contract. Say, for instance, down buried in this contract is a hallucination or is some misinformation, which AI is susceptible to. You then send that contract out to your customer. They do what they do, and then their customer identifies this issue, sues them, and then they come back and sue you because you wrote this crazy hallucination in the contract. You've got to make sure that you do the work product, but also you check and verify that there's no issues with the AI created content. Number 5, guard against manipulation. Manipulation can come in the form, lots of different forms, but what's happening now with AI is taking the phishing and cyber attack and security breach situation to the next level. I use this example. Say, for instance, you are a business owner, you're trying to get a loan, and somebody puts a virus in your system and just sits there and quietly listens. They're listening back and forth what's happened between you and your banker. They identify who the banker is. They go out, they find a few videos online of the banker on Facebook or whatever, talking to a group of people, maybe at a Little League game, or maybe he's doing a ribbon cutting in a new office, new branch. And they take that and they make an audio version of his voice. That person then calls you and says, hey, this is Tom from the bank. We're ready for that. Turns out we're going to be ready for that down payment sooner than we thought. Here's the wire instructions. Please send me that $10K when you can. You thinking it's the person, and maybe he sends you an email at the same time. And again, there's a virus listening to this whole conversation. It now gives them a much more attractive way of getting in without being noticed. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. So you need to control your communications, control your channels, your email lists, your private channels, your Slack channels. Your IT people need to be on high alert, and they need to be using the latest tools to identify where there's going to be cracks in the armor so that they can understand how to deal with these things before they become a big issue. The other thing is you need to educate your customers about whatever your value is, whatever you're delivering. I mentioned previously in the guidelines and the communication. The communication that you're providing to your customers needs to be even more ironclad than it is today, because you don't want to be the recipient or involved in some phishing technique or phishing issue if they're using your communication channels to their benefit. These bad actors, they'll stop at nothing to get money from their victims, and you don't want to be part of that. The last thing I'll say, number 6, is build a bridge to the post-2040 opportunity. This number 2040 is interesting. I'll come back to that in a second. So that means, the biggest thing that means is you need to develop a very flexible business model that can pivot very quickly as needed. This was my downfall when I ran my company. I did not pivot fast enough. I had built a company from scratch. I grew it very quickly. 7 years in, the market started to shift. I took advice from people that had good hearts, told me to focus on my core, where I had these other voices clamoring at me. They said, ignore them, focus on what got you successful. 18 months later, I closed down my business. And that was a direct result of me not following the market and instead following what got me there. When I worked with Adam Hartung at Spark Partners, he called that a success formula, which sounds great, but in fact, it's not, because it's the formula that got you there, but it's not the formula that'll continue to get you to the next places. You've got to follow the market. And as such, you got to be ready to pivot. One day you might be doing this, the next day you might be doing that. And a lot of it could be as a result of AI. Maybe you'll go from, and I'm using this accounting firm as an example. Maybe you go from an accounting firm, and then 2 years later, you'll be a software AI firm instead. Maybe you'll take these tools and you'll identify that there's a gap in there, and you'll say, you know what, we're going to go a different direction. We're going to hire some software developers, or we're going to hire a company of AI championed agents, and we're going to create a software tool or AI tool to do this thing that's missing in the market. So that's what I mean by being nimble. Something else that you need to do in this space is create community. Community is one of these words. It sounds like really soft and like fluffy and all that, but it's very powerful. When you identify a community that is useful in your domain space, you will not only amplify your company, but the market at large. There's one here in particular that is Optics Valley, and there's a sort of a subset that is it kind of came from Optics Valley, but it's completely separate. It's the supply chain network that Peter Mantis is putting together. That is a great example of people in similar space, optics, defense, machining, all that, are working together to elevate the entire community here of Tucson and take us to the next level. That will become even more important because competition is going to become even more fierce, and the world, if it's a little bit hilly and mountainy now, will be flat. It could be flat completely. You'll be competing with people in Macedonia. You'll be competing with people in New Zealand and Chad, and you name it. It's just going to be completely a different marketplace as the world becomes smaller and smaller because of the internet, because of these networks, and because of AI. The last thing I'll say on the building the bridge is realize that we are entering a time and place that's very tumultuous. And there's going to be a lot of expansion and contraction of markets. The more you journal and you keep records of how you're doing things, the more useful it will become. If one market contracts and there's a lot of bigger companies buying smaller companies and you want to compete with that, you can use your domain knowledge and your networks and everything else we're talking about here to come in a different direction and compete with the bigger market. The last thing I'll say has to do with another work product we created, which is a disruption readiness scorecard. This scorecard will be available on our website as well, and is a very powerful tool for identifying where you stand today in the AI framework and you can use it every 3 months, every quarter, to see how you're progressing along that process. It will help to also identify some weaknesses and areas where you can focus in on. We spent time on this because we felt it was important to give some quantitative numbers and values to things. I am a much more of a broad brushstroke kind of leader, but I rely on my team to do the minutia, the detailed work, and that's why we work well together. I won't talk too much about the Clifton Strength work that we do, but it has to do with the ability to understand where your weaknesses are and not worry about them. Focus on your strengths and instead bring in resources that are going to fill in the gaps of what you're weak at. Whether that's a human resource, whether that's an AI agent, there'll come a time in the next probably year or so, maybe 2, where you'll have a Zoom call, and one of the members of that Zoom call will be an AI agent employee of yours that will have a face, will have a body, will talk. Their name will be Jeff or something else, who knows. Hey, Brad, can you please email me those numbers we talked about yesterday? Absolutely, no problem. You'll get them mailed to you. That's on the horizon. That's here already. I mean, that's within grasp. You'll see that coming up. But this is a great scorecard for you to keep and maintain and use it to grow. I guess last thing is the storm is here. It's brewing, and it's going to continue to rain, and it's going to get into some floods and some madness. And I want you as a business leader to be ready for this and for whatever might be coming down the road. It is nothing to be fearful of. Just like the internet was and the telephone and the cell phone, all these things, it's not to be fearful about it, but it's something to be very, very cognizant of and prepare for. I'm going to finish off today by giving you some statistics that are produced by very reputable organizations, one of which is McKinsey. They predict by 2030, 5 years away, 375 million people will be displaced by AI. They believe that by 2050, 720 million people to a billion people will be displaced by AI around the world. That is a lot of people. And you think about the kind of people that are the most susceptible: writers, photographers, graphic designers, software developers, paralegals, financial analysts, insurance agents. You're talking also, those are the ones that they listed. I'll add on to that teachers, tutors, people that teach you how to play musical instruments or foreign languages. Those things will start to really become something that people will just easily pay $30 a month for, rather than hiring somebody for $100 an hour. And the other thing that's interesting about what they said is 60% of workers may require upskilling or will require upskilling in the next 5 years. So that means that 60% of all current workers today, within the next 5 years, will need to upscale their knowledge base to stay relevant. Because the worst thing that you can have happen to you is become irrelevant. It is something that I've talked to people that are advanced in age, and they say that is the number one thing they deal with, is becoming forgotten and becoming irrelevant. And certainly we don't want that to happen to anybody listening here. The least threatened industries: construction, skilled trades, installation, repair, and maintenance, machining, some engineering, not all engineering, farming. So there's elements out there that are going to be saved for a while. And I'm giving some gloom and doom numbers here, but obviously it's going to take a while to adopt. For instance, the video phone was invented in the 70s, but didn't really come into its own until the 2010s with the advent of these tools. And the idea here: be prepared, be ready for this revolution. And like the title says, lead towards that new renaissance. Because if you stay focused on your leadership and your decision-making coming from a stoic position, you will take that, create things around your business, create policies, create executables, if you will, to then enable that growth and prepare yourself, your family, your community, and your employees to be ready for that next renaissance. Thank you very much. Cheers.